Murdorf and the Mortal Flaw, Book 1, Chapter 21, Over the Snowy Mountains. I can ride, slowly, but I can ride. Skeener was insistent, despite having only a couple of days of recuperation. All right, but we will have to ride slow, insisted Windsor, weary of battling Skeener's nagging persistence. Nadora, can Skeener ride Orpa? That way, if he have any trouble, he can fly out of the battle. Skeener wanted to ride his own mount, but he caved in. Nadora thought it was her persuasive skills that convinced him, but it had more to do with Skeener's desire to escape the awkwardness he felt around her that made him shut up and shimmy up onto the dragon. He held in the moans that wanted to involuntarily belch out of his mouth from the pain he felt. Instead, he twisted his face in all sorts of contortions, trying to hold on to his manhood. Gilgore walked, since there was no beast large enough to ride. Knowing the journey was a trek of many days through a harsh, wintry climate, the riders loaded Skeener's horse with extra supplies. The ones loading up the horse never considered that Nadora was going to ride. Nuvatian saw the opportunity and jumped at it. You can ride with me. Body, legs, wrapped around me, loose hair, it all sounded great to Nuvatian. He prayed, God help me. Nadora mounted Valor and wrapped her arms around Nuvatian's waist. Her hair tumbled over her shoulder. Nuvatian wanted to grab her by her unmanageable mess of mane and lock lips with her, but he resisted. He had never felt such a tempting pull from a woman. Nadora compressed her arms around him tightly. She wanted to feel every muscle, every move. He resisted nestling her head into a flowing hair, although she wanted to. But she grabbed hold of her thoughts and reminded herself that a man was not in her plans. She would never marry, she was certain of it. They rode north across the green valley and into the needle-leaf hills. After a couple of days of riding, they could see beyond the horizon the snow-capped mountains. They looked like gigantic crystals made by the gods. The air grew cooler as they ascended into a world of glistening wonder. The riders stopped to pull out their warmer clothing and bundled themselves in furs and wools. As evening approached, colder air descended rapidly upon them, nearly taking their breath away. Now Nadora gave in to her desires, pressing her head into his hair as she tried to shelter her face from the cold. It served as a good excuse. He smelt like a man, the way a man ought to smell, rough, rugged, and worn. If it weren't for that woolly scarf, Nuvatian would have felt her breath on his neck. As much as he would liken that, he was glad for the fleece. He had standards, and he had to remind himself of them often. At night, they stopped to rest. Making camp along the banks of a rushing river, they caught some fish and prepared them. The fire was cozy, so they nestled close to the warming flames. Vandorf pulled out his sword and began to methodically sharpen his blade. Next he wiped down his boots and gear and cleaned out his mount's hoofs. Everything had to be in order or it would drive him nuts. Flea sharpened his sword too, but only because he had nothing else to do. Vandorf's quirky ways had not yet rubbed off on the man. Not that his mentor didn't try. As they sat around the crackling fire, Nadora noticed Skeener holding his chest. His complexion was pale and sickly. Skeener, are you okay? I'll be fine, Skeener assured her, his words incongruous with the sound of his voice. Leaning towards him, she noticed beads of sweat pooling up on his forehead. Nadora walked over and sat down beside him. You don't look so good. Fetching her bag of supplies, she convinced Skeener to let her look at the wound. He gritted his teeth together as she slowly pulled off the rag tied around his torn flesh. I know you don't like me much, but you must trust me with this. You must let me treat this and stitch it. Who said I didn't like you? His voice quivered with pain as he spoke, making his natural stutter even more prominent. It's rather obvious. Well, I like you very much, he gasped and stammered all at once. I just don't understand why a woman wants to fight like a man. Ouch, he squealed as she poked around at the wound. The door's voice was calm and cool. It's not because I want to fight. I fight against the darkness and evil. I have an obligation to the country as a leader. I fight to make the world a better place so that people will have freedom and not live under tyranny. That is the only reason I fight. I fight for the same reason you fight. Well, I can't argue with that. You saved my life, but I tell you the truth, I am so ashamed of what I did and said the other night when I had a little too much to drink. Skeener humbly lowered his head. Humiliation bled into his eyes. Nadora was astonished. You mean you're acting like this because you told a woman she was attractive? No, you know why. Skeener was still working with false information. No, please explain. Nadora was determined to fish out of him. What exactly do you mean? She asked. I am so embarrassed for taking off my clothes and running around naked, whispered Skeener, blushing with shame. I hope you can forgive me. What? Nadora squealed. Her voice rose. Who told you that you ran around naked? You mean I didn't? The realization removed the stutter for a moment. No, you didn't, she laughed. He sighed with relief, some of his self-respect finding redemption. When I see Navi, I'm going to whip him. The riders burst into laughter. He was trying to be discreet about it, but Navi's practical joke had already run through the grapevine. Everyone knew about the lie except Skeener, Nadora, and the new additions to the group. Now Nadora could observe the wound with a lot less tension. It was red and oozing. Pulling something from her bag, she began to apply a series of concoctions. She applied a tree sap oil derived from the Frigi tree, found only in the land of Shikadesh. Then she applied a healing herb known as rabdenza, which she mixed with crushed Mambergen tree root. It, too, came from the land of the immortals. The ointment stung as Nadora applied it to the infected wound. Finally, she wrapped it in strips of clean linen. In the morning, she advised him, I will clean your wound and reapply the herbs. Then I will stitch it. Gritting his teeth in pain, Skeener thanked her. The riders drew close to the fire and began to drift off to sleep. Only Nuvatian and Nadora were still awake. Nuvatian wrestled with his demon of lust, Nadora with her astute vow she made to maidenhood and politics. I had no idea that you knew so much about healing herbs, Nuvatian said, trying to strike up a conversation. Well, any knowledge I had must be credited to my grandfather, who studied herbs and their healing abilities. But most of those I put on Skeener came from the immortals. Nuvatian observed her face, sharp lines, high cheekbones, smooth complexion. You are a remarkable woman, he said, gazing into her eyes, attempting to make a connection with her. Remarkable, she replied, deflecting the compliment. I'm not so sure of that. Privileged, indeed. I was born into a privileged family, unlike so many poor souls in the world, and I try to do good things with that privilege. Why are you writing out here? Nuvatian persisted. Like Skeener said, why does a woman want to fight when she can live a comfortable life? This is not expected of you. Well, my privileged birth has given me the best education, as well as anything I want in life. I've tried to use my privileged position to gain skills that will be beneficial to people, especially those who are hurting. My grandfather used to tell me, Princess, that is what he used to call me, your beauty will fade, as also will your possessions. But how you treat others will never fade. It will be engraved in time, forever to be remembered. You are privileged, and though you can use your time to fancy yourself, I suggest you use your time instead to gain skills that will better the citizens of our kingdom. He used to say, she lowered her voice to imitate her grandfather, you can be a palace princess or a people's princess. Of course, he always encouraged towards the nobler of the two. I know that women are built different than men, she concluded. We are naturally not as strong. She used the opportunity to touch his biceps. They felt so strong and secure as she imagined. I know this is not for every woman, but this is my destiny. Being a warrior does not make me less of a woman, but being a princess makes me more responsible for the future of the next generation. Stunned by her response, Nuvatian looked into her eyes. You are as beautiful on the inside as you are on the outside. He saw that this woman had substance. There was something deeper to her than most women he had ever met. Nuvatian gently stroked his hand along the side of her face. Nadora felt all her strength leave her. Suddenly she became aware that her heart was pounding with every whisper of her skin against hers. She didn't like feeling weak or out of control, thus she felt the need to regain control of her emotions. Just then Skeener moaned in pain. Nadora saw it as a way to escape. Pulling her head back, she patted Nuvatian on the shoulder, then leapt to her feet and pretended to be mindful of Skeener, knowing full well that there was little else that could be done for him. He had to ride out the pain for now. She liked Nuvatian, but she was uncomfortable with romance. As a king's daughter, her life had been so guarded in some respects. Boys were foremost at the top of the list of things she was protected from. Swords, arrows, wild horses she was accustomed to, but then she was clueless about. Nuvatian was no dummy. He knew she was bailing on him. Beneath his breath, Nuvatian murmured a complaint against her. Next time I'm just going to grab that wild hare of hers and kiss her, he reasoned. Not everyone was asleep, as the two suspected. Windsor, who was camping near Nuvatian, had heard what transpired between them. With his own head tucked under the cover, he grinned, bemused by Nadora's unyielding ways and her self-control. The sun rose the next morning, but it offered little comfort from the frigid air. Rising early, Nadora cleaned Skeener's wound and reapplied the ointments. Then she put a couple of stitches in it. They bagged their belongings and rode north into the mountainous regions. Once again, Nadora rode behind Nuvatian, her arms wrapped around his waist. Their near kiss the night before was not spoken of, but the energy was felt. The morning sun glistened on the blanket of snow that buried this polar region. Streams of light danced magically across the slithers of crystallized diamonds, but it didn't bring a hint of warmth. The cold was nipping at their toes, impertinent as its merciless ways. A steady stream of snow began to shower down on them, making them one with the masterpiece. They scaled the icy monoliths, the snow becoming deeper and the temperatures colder. Icicles hung from the snow-covered trees like jewels, and ridges formed in the spires of rocks, looking much like crystallized works of artistic, breathtaking wonder. The howling wind took their breath away as it blew forcefully, snow-blinding them all, causing Nadora to bury her head in Nuvatian's back. By the 5th day of travel, they had ascended high into a celestial sphere clothed in liquid diamonds. Evergreen needle-leaf trees covered the mountains, but not a speck of green could be seen. It was a canopy of white. The landscape was rich with elegance, like a sanctum where the gods might congregate. Their ride was slow and the terrain rough as the snow continued to heap upon them. Snow-blinded, they went on instinct, trusting Windsor to keep them on course. Their fingers were now thoroughly numb, so were their toes and noses, their faces chapped by the winds. Felice fumbled with his lucky medallion, checking to make sure they were going in the right direction. He didn't want to get lost in a frozen tundra. According to his coin, they were on course. He was relieved. I'm freezing, Nadora said to Nuvatian, her arms wrapped tightly around his waist and her head hunkered down behind him, shielding herself from the wind. She had grown rather comfortable with her arms around him, and within the secret places of her heart she had fully enjoyed the closeness they had forged, but she refused to admit it.